What if I told you that the Duchess who once walked proudly into Buckingham Palace is now allegedly fleeing across borders like a shadow in the night? That the woman who once spoke of empowerment, freedom, and truth now finds herself at the center of whispers about FBI agents, hidden archives, and blackmail files that could unravel not just the monarchy, but governments too. Do you believe that? Or do you think this is just another chapter in the endless theater that follows Meghan Markle wherever she goes? This is not just another royal spat. This is not gossip about fashion or protocol. This is about power, secrets, and the chilling possibility that one woman could hold the future of a 1,000-year-old institution, and perhaps much more, in the palm of her hand. But the question isn't just whether Meghan holds these alleged secret recordings. The question is what she's prepared to do with them, and how far the world's most powerful agencies are willing to go to stop her. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. You can almost hear the ticking of the clock, can't you? A countdown toward exposure, scandal, and perhaps the destruction of an empire. Because if what's being whispered is true, that Meghan Markle holds tapes of royals and politicians saying things that could shake institutions to their core, then it's no longer just a family drama. It's a matter of global security. Imagine the scene. Late at night, a private jet waiting at the edge of the runway. Meghan, head low, dressed in black, steps aboard. Cameras flash in the distance, but no one gets a clear shot. Hours later, she is gone. Out of the country, vanished into the fog. And yet, she hasn't just taken her luggage. She's allegedly carrying with her something far heavier. Recordings that could topple crowns and ruin careers. Doesn't it sound like the plot of a spy thriller? But here's the twist. This isn't fiction. At least, not entirely. Reports, whispers, leaks, all point to something larger than a simple lawsuit. The lawsuits against Meghan were speeding up, lawyers closing in, judges setting hard deadlines. The walls were tightening. And then she ran. But not empty-handed. If the rumors are right, she ran with a digital vault of royal secrets. Now ask yourself, why would the FBI be involved in what appears on the surface to be a royal family dispute? Why would agents of the United States care if Meghan Markle was fighting lawsuits in London or hiding out in Montecito? The answer is simple. Because if the contents of these recordings cross borders, they're no longer just royal secrets. They become political dynamite. Evidence of collusion, corruption, scandal. Things that make Watergate look like a playground squabble. You see, Meghan was never just a duchess. She was an actress, a campaigner, a figure who knew how to work the camera and the press. But behind the smile, behind the glamour, was someone who understood leverage, who understood the power of holding something back. And according to these reports, Meghan's ultimate insurance policy wasn't money, wasn't property, wasn't even Harry himself. It was the recordings. Think about the timing. The lawsuits accelerate. The palace grows quieter. The tabloids grow bolder. And in the middle of it all, Meghan slips away. She doesn't announce it. She doesn't wave goodbye. She simply disappears. Why? Because disappearing gives her power. Vanishing makes the world ask questions. And questions keep her relevant. But here's the real dagger in the dark. If Meghan really does have these files, recordings of private conversations, late-night calls, off-the-record remarks, then she doesn't just hold her own fate in her hands. She holds the fate of others. Senior royals, political leaders, even allies in Hollywood. Each tape, each file, could be a weapon. Each could be the trigger for the next great scandal. Let's pause for a moment. Imagine a single tape emerging. King Charles making an unguarded remark, Prince William venting in frustration, or worse, a deal discussed with politicians that was never meant to be public. Imagine the uproar, the headlines, the fury. Would the monarchy survive another Diana moment? Would the monarchy survive a scandal that couldn't be brushed off as rumor or speculation, but came with digital proof, in Meghan's voice or in the voices of the royals themselves? The irony is almost poetic, isn't it? The very family Meghan accused of silencing her could now be silenced by her. The woman who said she was voiceless might now hold the loudest voice of all, one that can be unleashed with the push of a button, the click of a mouse, the leak of a file. And yet, there's another layer. Because if Meghan has these files, then she isn't just a duchess with leverage. She's a target, not just for the royals, not just for the tabloids, But for law enforcement, intelligence agencies, even private actors who would pay fortunes to see those files erased or, conversely, released. Every move she makes could be tracked, every call intercepted, every ally tested for betrayal. Do you see how deep this goes? This isn't just about royal drama anymore. This is about power, raw, dangerous, untouchable power. It's about who controls the narrative when truth itself becomes a weapon. But let's not lose sight of the beginning. Meghan's sudden flight wasn't just about running from lawsuits. It wasn't about escaping bad press. It was about survival. Because when the lawsuits closed in, when the deadlines tightened, Meghan made her move. She chose exile over submission. She chose flight over fight. But in doing so, she may have opened a new war, one far bigger than anyone imagined. And here's where the story twists again. If the FBI really is involved, then Meghan's flight isn't just the act of a desperate woman. It's the beginning of an international manhunt. A duchess turned fugitive, a royal scandal turned blackmail case, and a monarchy facing its darkest hour since the abdication crisis of 1936. What comes next? Will the tapes emerge? Will Meghan trade them for safety? Or will someone silence her before the world ever hears them? Because one thing is certain, Meghan Markle has never been more dangerous than she is right now. And if what's whispered in palace corridors and government offices is true, then this story is only just beginning. What drives someone to run in the dead of night? Fear? Guilt? Or the knowledge that staying one more moment could cost everything? Meghan Markle's sudden disappearance was not just a trip. It was not a holiday. It was not even a strategic retreat. It was a flight, raw, urgent, deliberate. And those who saw it unfold say it looked more like an escape scene from a spy thriller than the movements of a former duchess. Picture it. The lights at a private airfield blinking in the distance. A sleek jet waiting with engines humming low, cloaked in secrecy. No red carpets. No staff with umbrellas. No waving for the cameras. Just shadows. Just whispers. And then, a figure moves swiftly, escorted by only a handful of faces, none of them familiar to the public. Was it Meghan? Witnesses insist yes. They say she kept her head down, wore dark clothing, and moved with the pace of someone who had no time to lose. But here's the question we have to ask. Why flee at all? What was it about those lawsuits that suddenly accelerated her plans? Was it just about money? Or was there something far deeper, something hidden in files, recordings, and documents she didn't want anyone to see? And let's be honest here. People don't just run unless they feel the ground is shaking beneath their feet. Meghan wasn't being hounded by paparazzi that night. She wasn't attending a gala or stepping out for dinner. She was vanishing. Deliberately. Silently. Strategically. That kind of disappearance signals more than inconvenience. It signals crisis. The lawsuits had been circling her for months. Critics said she had dodged them, delayed them, twisted them into endless knots of legal maneuvers. But suddenly, the tone shifted. Deadlines were no longer soft. Judges were no longer patient. Lawyers smelled blood in the water. And then, like clockwork, Meghan was gone. Coincidence? Or carefully timed? Think about the irony. For years, Meghan accused the palace of trapping her, of silencing her, of locking her in a gilded cage. Yet here she was, allegedly fleeing like someone cornered, as if she were the one hiding a dangerous truth. Doesn't that contradiction sting? The woman who demanded freedom is now accused of running from it. But let's rewind. Because in the hours before her flight, reports say Meghan was making phone calls, frantic, hushed, urgent. Who was she calling? Some say lawyers. Others say confidants. A few even whisper she reached out to contacts far outside the royal bubble, tech specialists, media fixers, even private security figures with ties to intelligence communities. That's right, intelligence communities. Because if Meghan really did have recordings of royals and politicians, then she wouldn't be talking to friends over coffee. She'd be negotiating with people who understood the stakes. And here's where it gets darker. A leak claimed that Meghan didn't just board that plane with luggage. She boarded with hard drives. Encrypted, hidden, shielded from detection. Now, we can't prove that. But the whispers are loud enough to make even hardened skeptics take notice. Why would Meghan run with evidence? Because evidence is leverage, and leverage is survival. If the lawsuits threatened to strip her of money, titles, influence, then recordings could restore her power, or at least protect her from destruction. Let me ask you this. If you were Meghan, Knowing the world's most powerful family had turned against you, what would you do? Would you fight barehanded in courtrooms where the odds were stacked? Or would you clutch your insurance policy tight and vanish into the night, waiting to strike when the time was right? The image of Meghan slipping away isn't just symbolic. It's strategic. Royals rarely move unseen. Celebrities thrive on being visible. But Meghan's absence was louder than her presence. The silence screamed. The void raised questions. And questions keep a story alive. And make no mistake, the story lived. From the moment her flight was spotted, tabloids exploded with theories. Was she in South America? Was she in Europe? Some said Dubai. Others swore she was hiding in Canada, returning to familiar ground. But here's the twist. Every report contradicted the last. No one could pin her down. And isn't that the mark of someone who knows exactly how to vanish? Here's the chilling part. The FBI allegedly got involved almost instantly. Not weeks later. Not after rumors spread. Immediately. Why? Because Meghan wasn't just skipping town. She was skipping jurisdiction. And when jurisdiction crosses borders, federal agencies step in. The FBI doesn't waste resources chasing gossip. They move when there's a signal of real danger, to security, to alliances, to secrets that could tear open international trust. So what does that tell you? If the FBI is circling, it means they believe Meghan has something worth chasing. Something that could compromise not just royals, but political figures tied to them. And if she's holding recordings, then those recordings are no longer family secrets. They're classified as evidence. Evidence of what? That's the million-dollar question. But before we get there, let's zoom back to the night of the flight. Witnesses at the airfield said Meghan looked nervous but determined. There was no Harry by her side. No children in sight. Just her and a select group. Did she leave Harry behind? Was this her move alone? Or did Harry know and choose silence? That silence speaks louder than words. Because if Harry wasn't with her, then what does that mean for their marriage? Their so-called united front? And yet, the most shocking detail came later. A leak claimed that Meghan's flight path didn't match her supposed destination. That's right. She may have faked her trail. A misdirection. A digital ghost. As if she wanted people to chase shadows while she slipped into the one place no one would think to look. Doesn't that sound like someone trained in more than just acting? But maybe the most haunting question is this. What exactly was she running from that night? The lawsuits? The palace? Or the possibility that her own insurance policy, those secret files, had already been discovered? Because if Meghan believed someone was about to expose her stash, then fleeing wasn't cowardice. It was survival. A desperate gamble to stay one step ahead of forces far bigger than her. And just when the world thought Meghan had vanished completely, something surfaced. A trace, a breadcrumb, a clue to where she might be. And that clue would change everything. What happens when the courtroom becomes a battlefield and every document, every deadline, every whispered testimony threatens to collapse the walls around you? That was the reality Meghan Markle allegedly faced as her lawsuits gathered speed like a freight train with no brakes. For months, she had delayed, maneuvered, sidestepped, painting herself as the misunderstood Duchess under siege. But when the judges stopped listening to excuses, when the paperwork stacked higher than her defenses, there was nowhere left to hide. Let's ask the hard question right away. Why did these lawsuits suddenly accelerate? Because legal systems don't just wake up one morning and decide to move faster. Something, or someone, had applied pressure. And here's where the whispers take a darker turn. Some say it was the monarchy itself, leaning quietly on the levers of power, pushing judges and lawyers to close in. Others insist it was Meghan's own trail of contradictions, half-truths in interviews, questionable financial dealings, and accusations of deception that finally convinced the courts to act with urgency. But whatever the reason, one thing is clear. Meghan wasn't ready. Picture the scene. Court clerks filing motion after motion. Attorneys presenting timelines and contracts, demanding clarity, demanding answers. And Meghan's legal team? Scrambling. A once carefully constructed strategy of delay and deflection suddenly crumbling under the weight of real accountability. It's like watching a chess game where the queen is cornered, no escape left except a desperate gamble. Doesn't it strike you as ironic? Meghan often spoke about her truth. Yet in those courtrooms, truth wasn't something you could redefine. It was written in black and white, in signatures, in dates, in evidence that refused to bend. And what about Harry? Did he stand beside her, supporting her through each hearing? Strangely, his presence was inconsistent. Sometimes there, often not. And each absence sparked a new wave of speculation. Was Harry distancing himself? Or was Meghan deliberately standing alone, unwilling to let him be dragged into the depths with her? Then there's the money. The money. Lawsuits are expensive, grueling, relentless. And Meghan's reputation was already under fire. Deals collapsing, projects failing, Netflix's patience allegedly thinning. The lawsuits weren't just threatening her credibility, they were bleeding her financially. What happens when the money runs dry? When the dream mansion in Montecito becomes more of a gilded cage than a sanctuary? This is where the reports of secret recordings begin to make sense. Think about it. If you were trapped in lawsuits, if your finances were dwindling, if even your allies were pulling back, wouldn't you cling to your last remaining weapon? Wouldn't you use whatever leverage you had, no matter how dangerous? And here's the contradiction that burns at the core of this saga. Meghan built her image on transparency, on being the brave voice who told the world what the royals tried to silence. Yet behind the scenes, she was allegedly hoarding secrets of her own. Not stories, not interviews, but recordings, blackmail files, insurance policies against a family and a system she claimed to have escaped. Isn't that the ultimate irony? The woman who claimed she was a victim of secrecy may have been its greatest practitioner. As the lawsuits closed in, deadlines were set in stone. Judges demanded answers. Payments loomed. Settlements looked less likely with every passing week. It was no longer about managing a narrative. It was about survival. And survival often breeds desperation. That desperation reportedly manifested in frantic calls, whispered offers, deals behind closed doors. Imagine it. Meghan reaching out not just to lawyers, but to intermediaries, people who could whisper in the right ears, people who could make cases disappear. But the difference between whispers and deals is simple. Whispers rarely hold in court. Evidence does. And when the evidence began stacking up, Meghan's carefully polished armor began to crack. Let's pause. Imagine being in that position. Cameras waiting outside every courthouse. Headlines screaming betrayal. Lawyers dissecting every word you've ever spoken. Would you stand and fight? Or would you run before the verdict could shatter you completely? Because that's what happened. Meghan didn't wait for the gavel to fall. She didn't stand in the dock to defend herself. She fled before judgment could be passed. The lawsuits had forced her hand. They had sped up the clock. They had cornered her into making the one move she thought she still controlled: escape. But escape is never clean, is it? The lawsuits didn't vanish just because she boarded a plane. If anything, her sudden disappearance only confirmed suspicions. Prosecutors doubled down. Investigators sharpened their focus. And the FBI? Yes, the FBI began asking questions. Why? Because when someone flees jurisdiction during active lawsuits, it isn't just drama. It's obstruction. It's a red flag that signals there's more here than meets the eye. And so, the lawsuits that Meghan tried to outrun didn't just follow her. They transformed. They escalated. They became something far larger than courtroom disputes. They became the foundation of an international scandal. But the lawsuits were only the surface. Beneath them lay something far more explosive, something that hinted at why Meghan ran not just from judges, but from shadows much darker. Because when investigators started digging deeper, they didn't just find contracts and bank statements. They stumbled upon whispers of hidden files, recordings that could bring down more than a duchess. What could possibly drive a duchess to hoard recordings like classified documents? Was it paranoia, strategy, or something more sinister? Because when whispers began spreading that Meghan Markle wasn't just collecting stories, but storing conversations, real, raw, unfiltered words from royals and politicians, the tone shifted from scandal to danger. Think about it. A diary is one thing. A memoir is another. But a recording? That's proof. Cold, undeniable, merciless proof. And in a world where every royal statement is polished, every public appearance rehearsed, the idea that Meghan might hold the unscripted voices of the most powerful figures on earth was like striking a match in a room filled with gasoline. So how did these rumors start? Some say it began with staffers, people who worked close enough to Meghan to notice patterns. A phone always nearby, a device tucked into her purse, conversations that felt strangely too quiet, too calculated, as if she wanted people to slip. And later, hints emerged from insiders who claimed Meghan had. Now ask yourself, who was she recording? Harry? Senior royals? Politicians she met at fundraisers? Celebrities who thought they were confiding in her? The possibilities are endless. But what matters isn't just who, it's when. Reports suggest that Meghan began compiling these files long before she ever left the palace, long before she ever sat in front of Oprah. That means this wasn't reactive. This was proactive. Doesn't that sound less like desperation and more like a plan? And here's where the contradictions start to burn. Meghan often spoke about trust, honesty, the importance of voice. Yet if these recordings exist, then every smile, every embrace, every casual chat might have been a trap, a setup, a performance for a hidden microphone. Isn't that the cruelest twist of all? But let's not get lost in speculation. Let's focus on what surfaced. Whispers from legal circles claim that investigators stumbled upon references to encrypted files, code names, password-protected drives, files labeled in ways only Meghan and her closest confidants could decipher. And tucked within them, alleged recordings of conversations that should never have left palace walls. Now imagine for a second what those tapes could contain. A senior royal making disparaging remarks about a world leader. A private conversation hinting at backroom deals between Buckingham Palace and politicians. Even a heated family dispute, raw with anger and betrayal. Each one, if real, would be a headline. Each one would be a dagger pointed at the monarchy's carefully crafted image. And that's not all. Some insiders claim that Meghan didn't just record, she threatened. Not publicly, not in press statements, but privately. Quiet messages passed along. Protection, respect, leverage, in exchange for silence. Was it blackmail? Or was it survival? That's the question that splits public opinion. But either way, it's power. And power is exactly what Meghan needed when the lawsuits closed in. Let's ask something blunt. If you knew you were about to lose everything, reputation, wealth, security, wouldn't you cling to your last weapon? Wouldn't you use it to buy time, protection, even freedom? But there's a chilling twist. Some of these alleged recordings weren't just of royals. They were said to involve politicians, not only from Britain, but from across the Atlantic. That's where the FBI's interests suddenly make sense. Because once American names enter the mix, it's no longer a royal family squabble. It's a matter of national security. A duchess with tapes implicating U.S. politicians? That's dynamite. That's enough to send agents knocking at her door. And here's the cruel irony again. Meghan once claimed she was silenced, voiceless, ignored. Yet now, if these rumors are true, she possesses the loudest voice of all, one that could drown out crowns and careers alike. But storing recordings is one thing. Protecting them is another. Meghan wasn't naive. If she had these files, she would have kept them secure. Multiple backups, cloud servers, encrypted vaults scattered across borders. Some even say she entrusted copies to allies abroad, ensuring that if anything happened to her, the files would surface anyway. Like a dead man's switch. Do you see how dangerous that is? It means Meghan doesn't just hold the secrets. She's woven them into a web so tight that pulling one thread could unravel everything. And if someone tried to silence her, those recordings could leak overnight. Now let's talk about the emotional fallout. Imagine being a member of the royal family, realizing every conversation could have been a performance. Imagine not knowing if your words, your anger, your laughter, even your private griefs had been captured and stored like weapons. Would you ever trust her again? Would you ever forgive her? And imagine being Harry. Did he know? Did he help? Or was he one of the voices caught on tape, betrayed by the woman he gave up everything for? The thought alone is devastating. But perhaps the most haunting part is this. Reports claim there is one file, one recording, more dangerous than the rest. A conversation so explosive it could not only destroy the monarchy, but fracture alliances across continents. Its contents remain a mystery. Its whispers grow louder. And investigators are desperate to find it before it finds daylight. Because if that recording ever leaks, nothing will ever be the same. Why would the FBI, the most powerful law enforcement agency in the United States, care about Meghan Markle's private disputes with the British monarchy? Why would American agents dedicate resources, manpower, and political muscle to pursue a former duchess who, on the surface, appears to be nothing more than a celebrity embroiled in endless lawsuits? The answer is chilling, because this is not about gossip. It's not about fashion, titles, or family feuds. This is about recordings. Alleged files that contain the raw voices of royals and politicians, unguarded and unfiltered, speaking words that could fracture alliances and destabilize trust between nations. Imagine this. Somewhere on a hard drive or an encrypted cloud server, Meghan Markle holds conversations that include not just King Charles or Prince William, but U.S. senators, diplomats, even White House officials. Think about the consequences. One leak, one audio clip, one 30-second file broadcast to the world could spark an international scandal. The monarchy would be shaken. Political careers would crumble. Trust between Washington and London could collapse overnight. Now ask yourself, if you were sitting in an FBI office and you received credible intelligence that such recordings existed, what would you do? Would you ignore it? Or would you make Meghan Markle a priority target, classified as a national security concern? That's exactly what reports suggest happened. Meghan's name allegedly appeared in an internal memo, marked with urgency. Agents didn't see her as just a duchess. They saw her as someone holding political dynamite, a private citizen with access to secrets she should never have had. And here's where the contradictions start to burn. Meghan always spoke of transparency, of truth, of freedom. Yet behind the curtain, she was allegedly building her own empire of secrecy. Isn't that the ultimate twist? The woman who claims she was silenced may have been hoarding the loudest, most dangerous voices of all. But how did the FBI even become aware of these files? The trail points back to digital forensics. Investigators, combing through court filings and financial data, reportedly stumbled upon encrypted references, file names, cloud accounts, storage keys. Nothing clear enough to expose the contents, but enough to raise alarms. Enough to suggest that Meghan wasn't just hiding assets. She was hiding evidence. And here's the cruel irony. The very lawsuits Meghan fled may have exposed the existence of the recordings. In trying to fight the legal battles, breadcrumbs were left behind. Breadcrumbs that led investigators to a darker discovery. Think about that for a moment. Meghan ran from the lawsuits, but the lawsuits themselves may have been the spark that alerted the FBI to something much bigger. Let's pause here. Have you ever noticed how truth has a way of leaking out when people least expect it? It never bursts through the front door. It seeps through cracks, a stray email, a forgotten file, a witness who says one word too many. And that's exactly how Meghan's hidden archive came to light. So what did the FBI do? They didn't wait. They didn't sit back and hope it would resolve itself. They allegedly classified Meghan as a person of interest. They began mapping her movements, tracing her communications, watching every airport she passed through. Because if she fled across borders with those files in her possession, then those recordings were no longer just private property. They were evidence of potential blackmail. And blackmail that touches politicians? That's a national security crisis. Picture the panic inside the walls of Buckingham Palace. Imagine the phone calls between Washington and London. Quiet, urgent, furious. Royals begging for discretion. Politicians demanding action. The FBI caught in the middle, balancing diplomacy with the undeniable reality. If Meghan leaked those tapes, both nations would burn. And here's where the paranoia deepens. Some insiders whisper that Meghan didn't just threaten exposure. She demanded protection. She allegedly told allies she would release the recordings if she wasn't given safe passage, legal shielding, immunity from prosecution. Doesn't that sound like a hostage negotiation? Except this time, the hostages weren't people. They were reputations, careers, crowns. But protection isn't something you can demand from agencies like the FBI. Once you threaten them, you're no longer a protected witness. You're an adversary. And adversaries don't get courted, they get hunted. Let me ask you directly. Do you think Meghan underestimated what she was playing with? Did she really believe that holding secret tapes would make her untouchable? Or did she realize too late that the very weapon she thought would protect her had painted a target on her back? And here's the darkest possibility. If the FBI really does want Meghan at any cost, as the whispers say, then we may be witnessing the transformation of a duchess into something else entirely. A fugitive, pursued not just by tabloids or palace aides, but by the world's most relentless investigators. And yet, even with the FBI circling, Meghan wasn't powerless. She had her insurance policy, her archive, her alleged dead man switch. One wrong move against her, and files could surface. which means this wasn't just a chase. It was a standoff, a high-stakes game of chicken between a woman armed with secrets and an agency armed with power. But what neither Meghan nor the FBI may have expected was this. When investigators dug deeper, they found whispers of one file in particular. A recording so explosive, so unthinkable, that even seasoned agents reportedly froze at the thought of its contents being made public. And that file was about to drag the royal family into its darkest hour yet. What happens when whispers turn into allegations, and allegations harden into fear? When private suspicions are spoken out loud in corridors of power, transforming Meghan Markle from an estranged duchess into something far more dangerous, a potential blackmailer. This is where the story crosses into its darkest territory yet. Because according to reports, Meghan wasn't just storing recordings. She wasn't just protecting them for a rainy day. She was allegedly using them. Quietly. Strategically. Passing messages through intermediaries. Demanding protection in exchange for silence. The word used in hushed tones by those closest to the scandal was one no royal PR team ever wanted to see in print: blackmail. Let's ask the question directly. Would Meghan Markle, the woman who stood before the world and spoke of compassion, equality, and kindness, really threaten to expose her own family for survival? Or is this another twist in the endless war between her and the palace? That's what makes this chapter so chilling. Because the line between survival and betrayal is razor thin. Imagine the scene. Behind closed doors, aides sit nervously, whispering into phones. Messages are relayed. Meghan won't release anything, for now. But in return, she wants protection, immunity, even influence. Isn't that the very definition of leverage? Not just protecting herself, but actively shaping outcomes with the power of what she held. And here's the contradiction that tears at the heart of this saga. Meghan once accused the royal family of wielding power unfairly, of silencing her voice, of using her as a pawn in their games. Yet here she was, allegedly playing the exact same game, silencing them with the threat of exposure, holding power in her own clenched fist. Doesn't that sting with irony? But it didn't stop with the royals. Reports suggest that Meghan's leverage extended beyond Buckingham Palace. Some of the alleged recordings included political figures, business leaders, even celebrities. That means her bargaining chips weren't just crowns and thrones. They were global reputations. Imagine a phone call leaked of a prime minister mocking an ally, or a Hollywood mogul confessing to shady deals. Each recording was a weapon, and each weapon made Meghan more dangerous. Here's where the emotional weight sets in. Think about Prince William. Think about King Charles. Men who grew up with scandal, who watched the monarchy nearly break under the weight of Diana's story. Now imagine them realizing that Meghan, the woman they once welcomed into their fold, might be holding their reputations hostage. Would they panic? Would they rage? Or would they strategize in silence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back? And what about Harry? Did he know his wife was allegedly building this archive? Did he approve of her alleged tactics? Or was he caught in the middle, torn between the woman he loved and the family he was born into? That question remains unanswered, but the silence surrounding it screams volumes. Now here's where things get darker still. A source close to the investigations whispered that Meghan didn't just threaten exposure casually. She allegedly used timing as her weapon. When lawsuits closed in, she hinted at what she held. When the FBI grew louder, she made veiled suggestions. Every crisis became an opportunity to remind the world. She had files, and she wasn't afraid to use them. That's not just self-defense. That's control. But control can be a dangerous illusion. Because once whispers of blackmail reached the ears of investigators, Meghan's role shifted instantly. No longer a victim. No longer even a witness. Now, she was painted as a suspect. Someone to be contained. Someone to be watched. And once the label of blackmailer attaches itself to your name, it never comes off. Let me ask you this. Do you think Meghan underestimated the danger of that label? Did she believe she could walk the line between leverage and crime, using whispers to her advantage without crossing the point of no return? Or did she already know the risks and simply decide she had nothing left to lose? The palace's response to these whispers is perhaps the most telling. Silence. Cold, absolute silence. No denials. No fiery rebuttals. Just the chilling quiet of an institution that knows to speak is to confirm. And sometimes silence says more than words ever could. But silence doesn't last forever. Because eventually, the weight of those allegations became too heavy to ignore. Leaks surfaced. Journalists began probing. Headlines hinted at blackmail, even if they never said the word outright. And the public? The public began to ask the one question that terrified everyone involved. What happens if Meghan actually presses play? Picture it. A file uploaded. A recording broadcast across the internet. Millions listening to the unguarded voices of royals and leaders, raw and unfiltered. The monarchy shattered in hours. Political careers torched overnight. The internet ablaze with fury. Could Meghan really go that far? And yet, here's the cruelest twist of all. Some say Meghan didn't even need to release the files. The fear alone was enough. The uncertainty, the not knowing. That, more than anything, gave her power. Because when people fear exposure, they make mistakes. They offer concessions. They play into your hands without you ever having to act. But fear is volatile. It cannot be controlled forever. And when Meghan allegedly used her leverage against the wrong person, someone who would not be threatened, someone who had the power to strike back, everything shifted. Because in the shadowy world of secrets and blackmail, one wrong move can turn the hunter into the hunted. And Meghan's next move would ignite a political firestorm no one saw coming. The section is complete. What happens when private threats spill into the public arena? When whispers of royal blackmail ripple beyond palace walls and land squarely in the political sphere, where stakes aren't just reputations, but entire governments. That was the moment Meghan Markle's alleged recordings stopped being a family scandal and became a global crisis. The fallout wasn't gradual. It was immediate. Reports suggest that as soon as intelligence agencies got wind of American names possibly caught on tape, senators, diplomats, donors, alarms went off in Washington. This wasn't palace gossip anymore. This was national security. If Meghan really did hold recordings of politicians, then she wasn't just a royal problem. She was a geopolitical threat. And here's where the contradictions grow impossible to ignore. Meghan had once positioned herself as a humanitarian, a bridge builder, a woman of compassion. Yet if these reports are accurate, she was now painted as someone willing to hold entire governments hostage with digital leverage. Isn't that the sharpest irony yet? The Duchess of Compassion turned into the Duchess of Control. But let's go deeper. Because politics is never just about right and wrong. It's about power. And when the possibility of blackmail entered the picture, both allies and enemies of Meghan began maneuvering. Some wanted her silenced. Others wanted access to her files. Think about that. Meghan may have found herself courted and hunted at the same time, a pawn in a larger chessboard where every player wanted her archive. Imagine the conversations behind closed doors. Advisors whispering to prime ministers, "If this leaks, we lose credibility." Senators on the phone with intelligence officers, "Find out what she has." And in London? You can picture it. King Charles grim-faced, William furious, aides scrambling to calculate how much damage a single file could do. Let me ask you, can you imagine the fury of politicians who suddenly realized their own voices might be sitting on Meghan's hard drive? Would they treat her as a victim, as the media once did? Or would they paint her as a danger, an enemy, someone who must be stopped before she pulled the trigger? And yet, here's the contradiction again. Meghan claimed she wanted protection. She claimed she wanted fairness, safety, dignity. If so, why target the very people who could have given her that? Did she miscalculate? Or did she know exactly what she was doing? Using chaos as a bargaining chip? The media frenzy added fuel to the fire. Tabloids hinted at explosive files. Bloggers whispered about U.S. senators caught making shady remarks about foreign policy. Social media spread theories like wildfire, recordings of billionaires, Hollywood elites, even presidents. No one knew what was real, but the uncertainty was deadly. Because in politics, sometimes the rumor alone is enough to destroy you. This is where comparisons to Watergate began to surface. Except, unlike Watergate, which brought down one president, Meghan's alleged archive could topple an entire system of trust between allies. One journalist called it a Pandora's box with no bottom. And the paranoia spread quickly. Politicians who had once courted Meghan at galas and fundraisers suddenly distanced themselves. Phone calls went unanswered. Invitations disappeared. Hollywood figures who had once praised her fell silent, fearful they might be next. Meghan's circle shrank, and the walls around her tightened. But here's the twist. Not everyone abandoned her. Some figures allegedly approached her quietly, offering deals. Immunity, protection, even money, in exchange for access to her files. Isn't that the most dangerous position of all? To be hunted and courted at the same time? To be both asset and threat, depending on who was calling? And what about Harry? Once again, his silence spoke volumes. Did he beg Meghan to stop? Did he warn her that playing politics at this level was suicide? Or did he, too, feel trapped, caught between loyalty to his wife and the knowledge that every move she made pulled him deeper into the storm? Now let's focus on the emotional core. Imagine Meghan herself in this moment, watching the headlines swirl, knowing the FBI wanted her, knowing politicians were furious, knowing the palace was plotting. Was she terrified? Or was she exhilarated, finally wielding the kind of power that no royal title could ever give her? But power without allies is fragile, and Meghan was running out of allies. The lawsuits chased her. The FBI circled her. Politicians distanced themselves. Even celebrities vanished from her corner, which left Meghan clinging tighter to the only thing she had left, the archive. And yet, the most dangerous moment was still to come. Because when whispers of the recordings reached a certain figure, someone far higher in the political food chain, the game changed entirely. This person would not be threatened. This person would not be manipulated. This person had the power to retaliate. And when they decided to strike back, Meghan found herself facing a firestorm she could never have predicted. The section is complete. What does panic look like inside the walls of Buckingham Palace? Not the panic of ordinary people, but the panic of an institution that has survived wars, abdications, divorces, scandals, and death. When whispers of blackmail reached the monarchy's ears, panic didn't look like screaming or shouting. It looked like silence. The heavy, suffocating silence of a family that knows the wrong word could detonate everything. Behind those gilded gates, the mood shifted. According to insiders, phones rang constantly. Private meetings were called. Senior advisors shuffled through corridors with files clutched tightly to their chests. King Charles, weary and aging, allegedly demanded answers. Prince William, ever the heir, seethed with quiet fury. Even Queen Camilla, who had endured her share of scandal, was said to be shaken by the scale of the threat. But here's the cruel irony. Meghan wasn't just another rogue royal in their eyes. She was different. She wasn't inside the palace anymore. She wasn't bound by protocol. And she wasn't afraid to weaponize her independence. That made her dangerous in a way few had ever been before. Think about it. Prince Andrew's scandal humiliated the monarchy, but it stayed confined to him. Princess Diana's interview wounded the crown, but it didn't threaten governments. Meghan, if the whispers were true, held the kind of ammunition that could topple the monarchy and destabilize international trust in one blow. Doesn't that explain why the palace suddenly looked less like a home and more like a war room? Here's what makes this chapter gripping. The royals, for all their power, were helpless. They couldn't raid Meghan's home. They couldn't seize her files. They couldn't silence her without confirming the very thing they feared. All they could do was wait, strategize, and hope she didn't pull the trigger. And what about William? Reports suggest he was the angriest of all. The man groomed for kingship, who had spent years protecting the crown's fragile reputation, now faced the possibility that his sister-in-law, the woman he never fully trusted, could unravel everything with the click of a mouse. Imagine his rage. Imagine his fear. Did he curse Harry for bringing Meghan into their lives? Did he curse his father for failing to control her? Or did he, deep down, know the truth? The monarchy had underestimated Meghan from the start. Meanwhile, palace aides scrambled. Some argued for negotiation, find Meghan, talk her down, by her silence if necessary. Others demanded confrontation. Expose her as a manipulator before she could act. But here's the contradiction. Every move risked making things worse. Negotiate, and you validate her leverage. Attack, and you provoke her into unleashing the files. So what did they do? They chose silence. The cruel, calculated silence of survival. But silence doesn't erase fear. Insiders whispered that even King Charles avoided certain phone calls, worried his words could be twisted, recorded, weaponized. Imagine living like that, unable to trust your own voice, your own conversations, because you fear they might be replayed in a courtroom or a press conference. That's not just paranoia. That's prison. And then there's Harry. His role in this moment is perhaps the most tragic. Torn between the woman he sacrificed everything for and the family that raised him, Harry was caught in a storm with no shelter. Did he side with Meghan, protecting her choices, even if they meant war? Or did he beg her to stop, realizing the monarchy could only bend so far before it broke? No one knows for sure, but his silence was deafening. And in that silence, you could hear the sound of a man trapped. Now let's zoom out. Imagine the global stage. The monarchy panicking behind closed doors. The FBI circling Meghan. Politicians demanding answers. And the public, hungry for drama, waiting for the next headline. The pressure cooker was reaching its boiling point. And the palace knew one thing. If Meghan pressed play, the monarchy might never recover. But here's the twist. While the palace panicked, Meghan allegedly made a move no one expected. Instead of hiding her archive deeper, she allegedly shifted it, outsourced it, encrypted it in locations beyond Britain's reach. And when investigators traced the files, they discovered something shocking. The archive wasn't in Montecito. It wasn't in California. It wasn't even in North America. It was hidden in a European vault. And that discovery would send shockwaves through both the monarchy and the FBI, because it meant Meghan wasn't just playing defense anymore. She was on the offensive, and she had moved her pieces into position. What kind of person builds a vault of secrets and hides it thousands of miles away from their own home? What kind of desperation or cunning drives someone to take evidence so volatile it could shatter nations and lock it behind encrypted walls in a European stronghold? That's the chilling revelation investigators whispered about when they traced Meghan Markle's alleged archive. The files weren't in Montecito. They weren't on Harry's laptop. They weren't on some dusty external hard drive tucked into a drawer. They were offshore, moved deliberately, protected like state secrets. And the message was clear. Meghan wasn't playing defense. She was ensuring her survival by placing her most dangerous weapon beyond the reach of anyone who might try to silence her. Imagine the scene. An anonymous server farm deep underground in Switzerland, guarded by steel doors and biometric locks. Rows of blinking machines humming with data. And somewhere in that endless stream of information, a folder labeled in code. That's where the alleged recordings were said to be stored. Safe from seizure, safe from destruction, safe from even Meghan herself being silenced. Because once they were there, the only way to remove them was with keys Meghan alone controlled. Doesn't it sound like a spy thriller? And yet, if these whispers are true, this was not fiction. This was survival. But here's where the contradictions sting again. Meghan once spoke of transparency, of bringing light to the shadows. Yet if these files were real, she had hidden them in the deepest shadows of all, placing them in vaults far from accountability. Was this protection? Or was it premeditation? And think about the timing. The lawsuits were closing in. The FBI was circling. The palace was panicking. And at that exact moment, Meghan allegedly ensured that her archive was secure overseas. Doesn't that feel less like coincidence and more like calculation? But how did she do it? Insiders claim she didn't act alone. A small circle of confidants, tech-savvy allies, and even foreign contacts may have helped her. Imagine the conversations, encrypted calls, hushed meetings, instructions whispered in code. Meghan, once an actress memorizing scripts, now orchestrating an operation that looked more like espionage than celebrity scandal. And here's the terrifying part. If the files were offshore, Meghan had created a dead man's switch. If anything happened to her, if she was arrested, silenced, or even disappeared, the files could be set to release automatically. A time bomb waiting to explode. Doesn't that change everything? Because it means she wasn't just running for herself. She had turned the archive into a living shield, ensuring her survival by tying her safety to the safety of others. Let's pause for a moment. Can you see the layers of irony here? Meghan, once accused of being voiceless, now controlling the loudest voice of all, but keeping it hidden in silence. The royals, once untouchable, now trembling at the possibility of their own voices being unleashed. The FBI, once the hunter, now forced to move carefully because their target held something they couldn't afford to mishandle. And the public? The public didn't know what to believe. Was Meghan the victim, building insurance against a hostile monarchy? Or was she the manipulator, turning family secrets into bargaining chips? The divide was sharp, emotional, unrelenting. But for those on the inside, one fact mattered more than opinion. The archive was real enough to terrify them. And the location of that archive, offshore, untouchable, meant Meghan had crossed a line no one expected. Now let's turn to the emotional fallout. Imagine being Charles, realizing his private conversations might be sitting on a Swiss server. Imagine being William, knowing his future as king could be destroyed not by policy, not by scandal, but by a single leaked recording. Imagine being Harry, torn between loyalty to Meghan and the creeping dread that he himself might be one of the voices hidden in those files. Doesn't it feel like a Shakespearean tragedy playing out in real time? And yet, here's where it gets darker. Whispers say that within the vault, there wasn't just one archive. There were backups, multiple layers, some hidden in Europe, others possibly scattered across other continents. That means even if one was destroyed, the others would survive. Meghan hadn't just built an insurance policy. She had built an empire of insurance, a global spiderweb of secrets ready to strike if she fell. But let me ask you this. If you had such power, would you ever be able to sleep? Could Meghan rest, knowing that at any moment, those files might slip into the wrong hands? Because power is intoxicating, yes, but it's also a curse. The more you cling to it, the more it consumes you. And that's exactly what seemed to happen. Meghan's circle grew smaller. Allies turned distant. Even Harry, according to some, seemed strained, exhausted by the constant paranoia. Meghan wasn't free. She was a prisoner of her own archive, chained not by guards, but by the weight of the secrets she carried. And yet, she couldn't let it go. Because without those files, she had nothing. Without those files, she was vulnerable. So she held on tighter. And the tighter she held, the more dangerous she became. But the greatest danger wasn't just Meghan holding the files. It was the possibility that someone else might already know where they were. Because when investigators followed the trail, they found something Meghan never expected, evidence that her archive wasn't as hidden as she thought. And that discovery was about to unleash betrayal on a scale no one saw coming. What happens when the people you thought you could trust begin to vanish, one by one? When the allies who once cheered your every move suddenly step back, leaving only silence in their place. That's the story of Meghan Markle in the aftermath of her alleged hidden archive being exposed. Because if you believe the whispers, the moment her secrets were traced offshore, her circle began to crumble. At first, it wasn't obvious. Friends didn't announce their departures. Celebrities didn't issue press releases cutting ties. No, it was subtler, unanswered calls, missed dinners, invitations that never arrived. Slowly, the once glamorous life Meghan had cultivated began to hollow out. And for a woman who thrived on image, visibility, and validation, that hollowing out was more dangerous than any lawsuit. Ask yourself, why would her allies turn away now? Was it fear of what she held? Or fear of being caught in the crossfire if those files ever surfaced? Imagine being a politician who once whispered secrets to Meghan, now wondering if your voice was locked inside her archive. Would you stand by her? Or would you run before the world found out? Here's the contradiction that cuts deepest. Meghan had always claimed her strength came from the people who supported her, from friends in Hollywood, allies in politics, sympathizers in media. But in this moment of crisis, many of those same allies allegedly abandoned her. Not because they didn't believe her, but because they believed her too much. They believed she really did have the tapes. And belief turned into fear. Look at the timeline. Reports suggest that major Hollywood figures who once supported Meghan's projects went silent. Invitations to charity galas dried up. Even social media, the battlefield Meghan once dominated, grew colder, with fewer posts celebrating her, fewer celebrities tagging her name. Doesn't that sound like a retreat? Like a quiet exodus of people who decided it was safer to stay away? And what about Harry? His role here is the most tragic of all. He had already burned bridges with his family. He had already given up his place in the monarchy for Meghan. But now, as allies disappeared, as the lawsuits circled, as the FBI dug deeper, Harry allegedly found himself more isolated than ever. Did he beg Meghan to stop? Did he realize she was dragging him into a firestorm he couldn't control? Or did he double down, choosing loyalty even when it meant losing everyone else? That question remains unanswered, but his silence during this period was louder than any statement could have been. Let's not forget the emotional toll. Imagine Meghan, once surrounded by admirers and powerful allies, now facing empty rooms and unanswered messages. The same people who clapped when she spoke at conferences now avoided her name. The irony? Meghan's alleged insurance policy, the archive meant to protect her, may have been the very thing that destroyed her friendships. Because who wants to stand next to someone holding a ticking time bomb? And here's where the paranoia creeps in. Meghan didn't just lose allies. She began to suspect betrayal. If her archive had been traced to Europe, someone must have leaked information. But who? A former friend? A staff member? Even Harry? Imagine the paranoia of not knowing who you could trust, of believing every ally could also be a spy. Doesn't that sound like a prison of the mind, built not of walls but of fear? The contradictions grow sharper here. Meghan always claimed she was betrayed by the palace, that she was driven out by coldness and cruelty. Yet now, surrounded by whispers of betrayal, she may have been experiencing the very thing she accused them of. Except this time, the betrayal wasn't royal. It was personal, but not everyone left her. Whispers suggest there was one ally who stayed, not out of loyalty, but out of calculation. Someone who saw Meghan not as a friend, but as an opportunity. A figure who understood the value of her archive, who understood that standing by Meghan could mean access to the very files that terrified the palace and the FBI. Doesn't that feel more sinister than comforting? To realize that your last ally isn't there to protect you, but to use you? This is the moment Meghan's story shifted from royal scandal to survival thriller. Alone, paranoid, desperate, clinging to files no one else could be trusted to hold, Meghan's world shrank. The larger the scandal grew, the smaller her circle became. And that shrinking circle left her vulnerable, not just to her enemies, but to the one friend who stayed. Because betrayal is never louder than when it comes from inside the house. And Meghan was about to find out that her last ally might be her greatest threat yet. What happens when the press smells blood but refuses to shout? When the tabloids scream scandal while the mainstream holds its tongue? That's the bizarre contradiction Meghan Markle found herself trapped in. A media frenzy on one side, an eerie silence on the other. And in that silence, the truth felt louder than any headline. Picture it. The tabloids ran wild. Front pages blared words like secret files, blackmail, Duchess on the run. Every gossip rag from London to Los Angeles plastered Meghan's face across their covers. Grainy photos of private jets, rumors of vaults in Europe, quotes from sources close to the palace. The narrative was out of control, a wildfire racing through public imagination. And yet, the mainstream media was cautious, almost too cautious. No major broadcaster dared run the full allegations. No top-tier newspaper printed the words blackmail outright. Instead, they danced around it, using phrases like unverified claims, explosive rumors, sources suggest. Doesn't that sound suspicious? When has the mainstream ever resisted devouring a royal scandal? Unless, of course, they were told not to. Ask yourself, why would the biggest outlets suddenly hesitate? Why would stories stop at the edge of the cliff, refusing to take the final leap? Some say it was legal pressure. Others whisper it was political, quiet calls from governments urging restraint. After all, if Meghan's alleged recordings did involve politicians, then the media wasn't just risking libel. They were risking international fallout. This split, tabloids screaming, mainstream silencing, created a strange paradox. For the public, the frenzy only grew. Because silence doesn't kill a story, it fuels it. The louder the tabloids shouted and the quieter the broadcasters stayed, the more people believed something massive was being hidden. Isn't that always the way? Suppression breeds suspicion. And Meghan? She was caught in the middle, hunted by one side, ignored by the other. Imagine seeing your face on every tabloid cover, painted as a villain, while the mainstream quietly refused to defend you. That kind of isolation isn't just humiliating. It's terrifying. But here's the irony. Meghan once mastered the media. She used interviews, podcasts, documentaries to shape her story. She knew the power of visibility. Yet now, her own visibility was destroying her. Every new headline fed the frenzy. Every unanswered rumor grew louder. And the silence from mainstream outlets? That robbed her of the chance to fight back. Because how do you defend yourself against whispers that never quite become accusations? Meanwhile, inside the palace, that silence was golden. Advisors knew the less said, the better. If Meghan wanted to throw punches, Let her do it in tabloids. Let her credibility rot there, while the mainstream stayed clean. It was a strategy of inaction, a war fought with silence. And it was working. But silence comes at a cost. For Meghan, the cost was credibility. The public began asking, if these recordings weren't real, why wouldn't the palace deny them outright? Why wouldn't politicians dismiss the rumors? Why wouldn't the FBI speak publicly? Each refusal to speak only deepened the suspicion that Meghan really did hold something worth hiding. And then came the breaking point. One evening, without warning, a file surfaced online. Not a full recording, not even a clear leak. Just a snippet. A few seconds of audio. Distorted, grainy, but unmistakable. A voice that sounded eerily like a senior royal making an offhand remark that no palace press release could spin. It wasn't enough to prove anything, but it was enough to ignite chaos. Social media exploded. Hashtags trended worldwide. Tabloids doubled down. And the mainstream? They could no longer stay silent. The leak forced their hand. And that tiny leak, that single drop of audio, changed the game forever. Because if one file could surface, it meant the rest weren't far behind. What happens when a single leak tips the balance, and suddenly a private hunt becomes a public manhunt? That's exactly what unfolded the moment those distorted seconds of audio hit the internet. Because from that point forward, the FBI was no longer in the shadows. They were all in, and the whispers grew louder. Meghan Markle was now wanted at any cost. Let's pause here. Why at any cost? Why would the most powerful investigative body in the world elevate a former actress, turned duchess, to the level of a top priority? Simple. Blackmail involving royalty is scandalous. Blackmail involving politicians is criminal. But blackmail that touches both, across borders, across governments, that's national security. And when national security is threatened, the rules change. Reports claim that after the audio leak, an internal FBI memo classified Meghan as a critical person of interest. That meant resources. Agents assigned to track her. International partners alerted. Interpol channels lit up. No more half measures. Meghan had allegedly crossed the line from scandalous to dangerous. But here's where the contradictions sting again. Meghan had always claimed she was voiceless, silenced, vulnerable. Yet now, if you believe the leaks, the FBI saw her not as a victim, but as someone who held a weapon, a digital arsenal capable of destabilizing alliances. Isn't that the sharpest twist of all? The Duchess of Vulnerability turned into the Duchess of Volatility. Now picture the strategy sessions in Washington. Imagine agents sitting in secure rooms, staring at maps and timelines, debating her next move. Was she still in Europe? Was she slipping through airports with disguises? Did she have safe houses provided by sympathetic allies? Every unanswered question raised the urgency. And then there's the paranoia. Because if Meghan had truly built a dead man's switch, files set to release if she were captured, then the FBI couldn't just storm in. They had to move carefully. One wrong step, one aggressive raid, and those recordings could flood the internet. Doesn't that sound like a nightmare scenario? Catch her, and you still lose. Let her go, and you risk everything unraveling. Meanwhile, the tabloids went into overdrive. Headlines screamed that the FBI was hunting Meghan across Europe. Anonymous sources claimed sightings in Switzerland, in France, even in Dubai. Social media tracked every private jet, every luxury hotel, every whisper of her presence. But none of it was confirmed. Meghan had vanished into the kind of invisibility only money, fear, and desperation can buy. But invisibility has a cost. And for Meghan, the cost was trust. Even allies who hadn't yet abandoned her began to question whether staying close was worth it. The FBI's reach was global. Anyone helping Meghan risked being labeled a conspirator. That kind of pressure turns allies into liabilities, and liabilities into informants. And what about Harry? His silence had grown deafening. Some believed he was still in California, distanced from Meghan's alleged maneuvers. Others swore he had joined her in Europe. But the truth? No one knew. And that mystery only deepened the sense of unease. Because if Harry wasn't with Meghan, had she left him behind? And if he was with her, was he complicit in the very scandal tearing his family, and perhaps two nations, apart? The FBI, for all their power, had one weakness: time. They couldn't wait forever. Every day Meghan stayed hidden increased the chances of another leak. Every hour raised the possibility of her negotiating with other players. hostile governments, rival intelligence services, shadowy billionaires who might pay fortunes for the files. That's what "at any cost" really meant. They weren't just hunting Meghan to punish her. They were hunting her to stop anyone else from reaching her first. Let me ask you directly. What would you do if you held recordings that could topple crowns and destroy governments? Would you use them as leverage? Would you delete them in fear? Or would you hide them away, clinging to them like a lifeline? That's the choice Meghan faced, and every move she made only increased the stakes. And here's the cruelest twist of all. Just when it seemed the FBI was tightening its grip, Meghan did something no one expected. She vanished again, not just from public view, but from every traceable footprint. Credit cards unused, phones silent, private jets cold. It was as if she had evaporated into thin air, and the world was left asking, had she outsmarted the FBI? Or was someone else now protecting her, someone powerful enough to shield her from the most relentless investigators on Earth? Because when Meghan disappeared this time, she didn't leave a trail. She left a void. And into that void poured rumors, suspicions, and the terrifying realization that if no one could find her, then no one could stop her. How does someone simply vanish in the 21st century? In a world of satellites, surveillance cameras, flight trackers, and digital footprints, how does a former duchess slip into the shadows so completely that even the FBI is left chasing ghosts? That was the haunting question after Meghan Markle's disappearance. She wasn't just unseen. She was untraceable. Let's set the scene. 1 week. Whispers placed her in Switzerland, near the banking vaults where her alleged archive might have been hidden. Days later, sightings popped up in Spain, a figure in sunglasses stepping into a black SUV. Then, in Dubai, a private jet said to have royal-looking passengers landed under heavy security. But each rumor contradicted the next. Every breadcrumb led to a dead end. Meghan wasn't just hiding. She was misdirecting. And here's the contradiction. Meghan once